Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Conversations here at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery. But before we get into that, I'd certainly like to give a land acknowledgement that we are here on the unceded traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoq and Passamaquoddy nations here. And the Beaverbrook benefits so much from being on the banks of the Wolastoq River. But to introduce Sonny Assu, a wonderful contemporary artist from British Columbia, of Indigenous ancestry, of Likwita and Kwakwaka'wakw ancestry. And Sonny is one of the great young contemporary artists, certainly coming out of British Columbia. And in fact, he's one of our most recent acquisitions that we just purchased one of his works, which relates to an Emily Carr painting of ours, but we'll get to that in a bit, so hang on. So Sonny Assu lives in Campbell River in British Columbia. Work really deals with the interconnectedness of his Indigenous heritage, but also pop culture and humor within his work and referencing that. And it's absolutely astounding work. It's extremely well done and diligent, but also with a very kind of openness too that's very welcoming to the viewers. So we're really excited to talk about that. Sonny graduated with BFA from Emily Carr University in Vancouver, but he also has an MFA from Concordia as well. Sonny's been shortlisted many times for the Sobey Award. He's won the BC Creative Achievement Award in First Nations Art in 2011. And he's also in the collection of beyond now the Beaverbrook Art Gallery, but also the National Gallery, the Vancouver Art Gallery. And so it's a real pleasure and an honor to have you here, Sonny. So thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's great to finally speak with you and to talk about my work and the piece that you have.
A lot of you probably know out there that the Beaverbrook has four Emily Carrs in our collection. And one of them is called, it's called Indian Village, Cape Mudge, 1912. And she painted it almost as soon as she came back from Paris when her work really changed. And it's quite an important work in her whole collection. And Sonny did a work from that. And I don't want to give too much away, but it has a very close connection to him and his background. And his work that we just acquired, and it was done in 2016, is directly inspired and works with that Emily Carr work. And Sonny's work is called Yeah, Shit's About to Go Sideways. I'll Take You to Amarin. You'll like it. Looks like home. And yeah, even Sonny admits, so he has pretty long titles in his work as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, especially these ones. I've been going crazy with the titles on some of these. It's been
yeah,
fun though.
exactly. So Sonny, before we get into it, we do have to talk just briefly about this. I mean, we spoke beforehand about the tragic events and the discovery uh, in Kamloops at the residential school, and we spoke about that. I just wonder quickly your feelings about this, and certainly our thoughts go out to you and all the people in British Columbia now, throughout Canada.
Yeah, I mean it's we talked about it earlier. I don't want to call it a discovery because I know a lot of Indigenous folk from across this place have known about these atrocities for quite some time. They've known that their children, their cousins, their sisters, their brothers, their aunties, their uncles, their mothers, their fathers have all had to go through a lot of these issues around residential school. And this discovery of the mass grave of the 215 children is shocking and appalling. But I think a lot of Indigenous folks have been talking about this for years. And now that it's been actually brought to light, I think it's really starting to affect people in multiple ways. I think it's going to spark a lot of healing within the community, and that's really going to be my focus for me and my family is to figure out the best way we can support our communities and how we can move forward to make sure that everyone's getting the space and time that they need to process this and to be able to speak about it and to hold the governments and the various churches accountable for their actions and inactions.
No, absolutely, and hopes that something really tangible comes out of this, which I think it will. You can feel it just in the broad population that hopefully something will change
Hmm.
from this. So with that, tell me about your work because I know in some ways leading to this, your work is political but humorous at the same time. I mean, it definitely to me has a message, but it's done so in a way that's absolutely accessible, and it plays with this idea of pop culture as well. I'm thinking when you were still at just right after graduating from Emily Carr, one of your transitional works I know that really got you well known was your Coke Salish work. '06, and you did the breakfast cereal series as well, and then that the play on the Obama poster of the Hope poster as well. So these things that are iconic within kind of Western culture. And then is it a matter of kind of indigenizing them in your mind, or is it a way of just kind of changing our focus to use something that we think we know so well to help us see something else that we actually don't know so well in the non-Indigenous world?
Yeah, it's both. I mean, those are some pretty good summaries of those works. I think it's definitely both, taking something that we know and using it to shed light on something that we don't know. Back when I did the breakfast series, for example, which at the same time the Coke Salish piece came out in 2006. I was really using humor as a way to bring people into these conversations, especially with the cereal boxes, because they're I made them to look like cereal boxes. They're three-dimensional. They're printed on paper. They have an ingredient list on the side of, various things that the boxes are speaking of. And a lot of that has to do with breaking down the barriers by using that humor to bring people into these conversations. At the time, I really wanted to kind of like just soften the blow, like bring people into the conversation around food insecurity and the loss of language and the loss of lands, by giving a bit of a chuckle and then hitting them with that punch of like, well, this is what actually happens. From the intervention series, there's a big part of humor that comes into that I want to use to soften that blow, that I want to use to bring people into these conversations, because I don't necessarily want to attack people with all these facts and have them feel like they're shutting down. I want them to hear what I have to say, to hear what my ancestors want me to tell, and to have them accept it as truth and figure out a way to change.
Well, I think that's true, because so much of what we consider factual is constantly changing. We make these assumptions and say history is constantly being rewritten. And now I think a whole history of Canada is absolutely being rewritten. And that, not that it necessarily has to make current people feel guilty, but we have to know what truth is, what facts were. And I think it'll make us sort of understand we need a bit of humility. And sometimes, thinking that we are the most generous people in the world can be damaging, because it can numb you to the truth of these things that happen.
For sure. Well, we could take that generosity and face it inwards, and I think that's what a lot of people have been propagandized for, over 150 years, the duration of Canada's existence. And if we're able to kind of focus that generosity inward to understand our history, our true history, as Canadians, then we have the power to change it.
Absolutely. Leads me to a real appreciation of one of your main series, which connects with the Beaverbrook work, which is part of that series. Is a few years ago, you started a group of works, probably about 15, 20 works, called Interventions on the Imaginary, where you did a series of digital interventions on actual Emily Carr paintings, or images of Emily Carr paintings. You didn't destroy the paintings themselves.
No.
So that would be an expensive thing. But
people have gotten really mad at me because they thought that I had, and I'm like, I'm not. I mean, I'm a known artist, but I'm not that known.
No, yeah, exactly. You have to really be pretty courageous to do that. But with this, tell us about that series, because it's remarkable, because it's this 21st century digital version of something which takes these iconic works, which as Canadians we think we know so well. Mm-hmm. But you told me in previous conversations, it's not just simply a message to the kind of white Canada, but it also reflects on questions of even Indigenous Canadians as well, about taking responsibility for your own past as well and understanding it.
Yeah, well, it's about just kind of figuring out where you come from as an individual and challenging what we've been told all these years about who we are and how this country came to be and how we fit in it or around it or with it as Indigenous peoples, and how we have the power to make these changes and to understand better where we come from, so we could stand up for our rights.
One of the ones that you have in the series, it's called What a Great Spot for a Walmart, which you did in 2014. Mm-hmm. And even in the title, it makes you realize the sort of wry idea that we associate Walmart with just pure consumerism and consumption and paving paradise. And it's an iconic one of Emily Carr's with the totem pole. But tell us a bit about that one as well. What sort of the gist is of that one as an example of the series?
Well, that one is actually Campbell River here, where I'm living right now, is my home ancestral community. This is where my ancestors come from. I'm living in the home that my grandmother built on the Campbell River Reserve, and the Campbell River First Nation, the Weewacum First Nation, has a couple development properties around town, a couple shopping plazas, and one of them is a Walmart that they partnered up with Walmart to build it. And so just beyond that tree line in the Emily Carr painting that I did the intervention on is a Walmart. And so what I wanted to talk about in that piece was that I wanted to really, you know, look at how we as Indigenous peoples are working within this colonial structure to build infrastructure for ourselves, to become self-sufficient in the eyes of the government, to be able to, provide for ourselves outside of the mandates of the Indian Act. And so really, like you said, paving over paradise is, I really wanted that piece to be a bit of an example to say, like, we don't need to pave over paradise to build up this infrastructure, especially a thing like Walmart.
So Sonny, the Emily Carr work that we're talking about today of Cape Mudge, one of the reasons you use it is it's your ancestral village, right? You have hereditary chiefs. So your great-great-grandfather, Assu, was quite critical of this piece. If you could tell us about that, it's fascinating.
Yeah, so my great-great-grandfather, Chief Beaulieu Sioux, was one of the first people in the village, and he actually encouraged other families to build single-family modern homes. And he dismantled his big house and built up his first home for his family. And so yeah, that's my ancestral village. That's where it comes from. And so this piece is interesting because it's a combination of both my ancestry as a Likwita person, but also my ancestry as a pop culture person and a lover of sci-fi and Star Trek. So the title is actually a reference to Star Trek, where in the original series in the 60s, Kirk and Spock and the crew happen upon this planet that's inhabited by quote unquote Native Americans. Turns out that there's this race or this species of aliens that went around the galaxy and plucked humans from Earth and various civilizations. So this one was Native American, and plopped them onto various planets. They colloquially called it Amerins, and so that's where part of the title comes from. And so what I was kind of speculating here is you got this big teal-y glowing ovoid, and an ovoid is a base shape within Northwest Coast design and mark making that is used
to see it on the drum behind you.
Yeah,
right. So
yeah, so like we got the ovoid here. This is the shape that kind of makes up a base shape that we use to build up other shapes. So like you can see a bit of an ovoid in the head of the raven that I've made there. But what I wanted to do with this series in particular, and a lot of my work actually, is giving a presence and a prominence to the ovoid itself and giving it its own language and ideology and its own presence. Anyway, so I have this big ovoid coming up, and I called it a UFO void. That's how I refer to them. And it's just coming up, and it's beaming out this family that's sitting in the foreground in the painting, that's kind of sitting around this fire, and it's beaming up these two big houses on either side of it, as well as the totem pole. And you can see a bit of a front of a canoe there as well. So it's beaming all these things up. And so I'm kind of speculating that these aliens had come back to Earth at some point to continue their mission to save these people from the impending colonial doom that was being forced upon them.
Was it important for you to use Emily Carr beyond the work itself as Cape Mudge, your ancestral land, but her as an iconic Canadian artist who people saw the early 20th century as depicting these Indigenous communities?
Hmm. Well, I think I stumbled upon. I knew I didn't stumble upon Emily Carr. Of course, I knew who Emily Carr was. I went to the institution that's named after her. But I stumbled upon using her work for this series just by chance. I was living in Montreal at the time, and I saw the catalog that the Vancouver Art Gallery, the National Gallery, had produced together for the exhibit of her work. That was a major solo exhibit at the Vancouver Art Gallery that was then brought across to the National Gallery. And I found this book in a bookstore in Montreal. It was in French, but I just wanted to use it for the images. And so what I did is I started scanning uh, all the images in the book to use them for this series. But my original intent with this series wasn't to be a strictly digital work. I was using it as a way to figure out how I was going to paint on top of discarded thrift shop paintings. But what I discovered was is that I really liked the immediacy of the digital realm, being able to play with a third dimension, being able to play with colors and make an artwork relatively quickly. And the series started off. As a strictly digital piece that was featured in Canadian Arts, I think in 2014 or whenever the first piece was when I did this series, as what I call decolonialgram. And it's one of my handles on Instagram, where I had the first 12 or 14 images laid out in the digital edition of Canadian Art as a Instagram feed called Decolonialgram. And then from there, I started printing them and using them in various exhibitions and doing more and growing the conversation around them. And I started to use sci-fi as a way to influence these conversations I was having. And then looking at that instance of sci-fi because I loved it so much now and as a kid, and how we have these representations of indigenous peoples in science fiction and how they are very stereotypical and how I could use them to have these conversations around the loss of lands, the loss of language, and to battle people's assumptions of what Emily Carr was doing, which I think is, it's for me, it's come to I've come to a very strong appreciation for Emily Carr's work through this series, which I'm still working on. Um, that I've been able to think about this work as almost like a collaboration in a way. I've met a lot of people that have said that they've studied Emily Carr's work as well, and they feel that she would probably get a good laugh out of this. And I just feel really good about making this work that has a bit of a political tinge and a political conversation, but it goes back to um, the basis of my work in using humor to explore and to welcome people into these conversations.
Well, that's great. Well, I hope you would smile a bit, because when we do reopen, mention that when we rehang this painting, the Emily Carr painting, yours will be hung next to it
That's
for
awesome.
a good long time. And so I think for them to really have this dialogue and for people to appreciate it honors both of the works. And so I mean we're just really thrilled to do that. So I hope that meets with your approval as well.
Oh, for sure. Like I'm really excited that my intervention is going to be hanging alongside the original. Because the original is a conceptual is a record, a factual and conceptual record of my village, and this was done in 1912. So this wasn't, this isn't ancient history. This isn't 500 years ago. This is not even 150 years ago, right? Uh, this is current history. There are people probably
Yeah,
in that
it's one
painting.
generation away from a whole bunch of people remembering that
Yeah,
village in 1912.
Oh, exactly. I mean, my great Chief Beaulieu was alive during that time. He could have been in the very background of this painting for all we know. And even my auntie, who's my uncle, married to my uncle, she's not native, but she grew up on Vancouver Island, and she remembers Emily Carr coming to visit her parents. She just remembers this crazy lady just coming up and having tea and hanging out with her parents. And it's interesting how this body of work that started off as an exploration to figure out how I can use them as paintings, but then became something of its own, has been able to spark various conversations, but being able to spark conversations that look at Canadian history, but people being able to say, I know that place. That is my grandparents' place. And, to have my auntie say, I used to see Emily Carr all the time as a kid. It's just a really surreal experience to be able to be part of those conversations. I think that she would be wholly supportive of the work that I have done and the work that Indigenous artists have been able to do in response to her works.
That's great. Well, Sonny, listen, thank you so much. It's been great to talk to you, and it really is an honor to have your work. So thank you for sharing it with us here at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery. And we really look forward to bringing you out here out east when COVID allows us. So will you come out
Yes,
east, give us a talk in
for
front of your
sure.
work and with Emily Carr's work?
Oh, that'd be fun. That'd be so fun.